My hay baler was sitting nose down in brown water. $10,000 of steel and hydraulics half drowned in a field that had been dry when I went to bed. By sunrise, nearly 2 acres of my family's land had turned into a muddy lake, and the only explanation waiting for me was a cream-colored envelope tucked beneath a rock on my porch. The woman who sent it called the whole thing an unfortunate drainage adjustment, which was a polished way of saying she had flooded my farm and hoped I would be too tired to fight back. My name is Caleb Mercer, and at the time this happened, I owned 46 acres outside a small town in central Tennessee called Bellwether, the kind of place that used to be mostly cattle fences, feed stores, and men who waved from pickup trucks even when they did not know you. My grandfather bought our land in 1958, paid cash from a tobacco crop, and built the first barn with lumber he milled himself. My father raised cattle there until his knees gave out, and I took over with hay, pasture leases, and a garden my sister joked was large enough to qualify as its own county. I was not rich, but the land was paid for. The equipment was mine, and every post, gate, ditch, and tree line had a story attached to it. Along the back of the farm ran a shallow natural swale. Nothing impressive, just a long depression carrying rainwater toward Miller Creek after heavy storms. It had worked that way for generations. The front fields drained into it. The water moved east, and within a day or two, the soil settled back down. Then, about half a mile uphill, somebody built Briarstone Reserve, a gated neighborhood with 187 homes, a clubhouse, decorative ponds, identical mailboxes, and lawns so green they looked computer-generated. The developer carved it out of an old dairy farm in 2019, packed the houses close together, poured miles of pavement, and installed a retention basin that looked suspiciously small even to someone like me who was not an engineer. Every hard rain sent water across the lowest streets, and every time that happened, the residents called the Homeowners Association. The president of that HOA was Vivian Cross, a woman in her late 50s with a silver blonde bob, a white luxury SUV, and the calm expression of someone who had never heard the word no without taking it personally. Vivian believed rules were a kind of private currency. She fined a widower for leaving a wheelbarrow beside his garage, forced a family to remove a basketball hoop during the school year, and once sent 3 warning letters to a retired nurse because her porch cushions were what Vivian called visually inconsistent with the approved neighborhood palette. None of that should have involved me because I did not live in Briarstone, did not belong to its HOA, and had never signed a document giving Vivian authority over so much as a fence staple on my land. Vivian saw it differently. The first letter arrived in April, printed on heavy HOA stationery and full of phrases like regional cooperation, shared watershed responsibility, and community-minded land use. Buried in the middle was the real request. Briarstone wanted permission to redirect stormwater overflow to the southern edge of my farm. They offered no payment, no easement fee, and no real engineering details, just a cheerful assumption that my field would absorb whatever their neighborhood could not. I rolled back politely because that was how my father handled disputes. I explained that the swale already carried runoff from my property, that the lower pasture stayed soft after major storms, and that adding discharge from nearly 200 homes could damage the soil and equipment access. I even offered to meet with their engineer and discuss helping them expand their retention pond if the costs were shared fairly. I sent the letters certified and kept the receipt in the kitchen drawer. 3 weeks passed without a reply. Then a county inspector named Martin Hale showed up at my door with a notice for a variance hearing. He was a tired-looking man with a clipboard and the apologetic posture of somebody delivering trouble he did not create. I read the first page twice, then asked, "They are applying to send water onto my land after I already told them no?" Martin rubbed the back of his neck. "The application says the affected owner was notified. Notified is not the same thing as agreeing." "I know," he said quietly. "You need to be at the hearing." So I went. I wore the only button-down shirt I owned that did not smell faintly like diesel, brought photographs of the swale, rainfall notes, and a hand-drawn map showing where their proposed channel would meet my lower field. Vivian arrived with a polished engineering report, 6 supportive residents, and a smile that looked friendly until you noticed it never reached her eyes. I asked the planning board for 60 days to hire my own hydrologist. Vivian stood up and spoke for 10 minutes about protecting families, preserving property values, and solving a regional problem through cooperation. She never mentioned that cooperation usually includes consent. The board approved her variance 4 votes to 1. In the parking lot, the only member who voted against it, an older man named Russell Dane, caught up with me beside my truck. He glanced toward Vivian, who was laughing with 2 board members near her SUV, then lowered his voice. "Mr. Mercer, get yourself a property attorney before they dig." I looked at the report under my arm, and for the first time I understood this was not a misunderstanding. Vivian had decided my land was cheaper than fixing her neighborhood, and the permit in my hand was how she planned to make me pay for it. The digging started 12 days later, just after 7 on a Monday morning, when a compact excavator came rattling down the access road beside my south fence with 2 workers and a foreman named Jesse Pike, who looked almost as uncomfortable as I felt. He showed me the permit before I asked, and I could tell from the way he held it that he had already guessed this job was going to become somebody's lawsuit. "We were told the landowner had agreed to the route," he said. "You were told wrong," I said. Then stepped back and let him work because by then I had taken Russell Dane's advice and hired an attorney. Her name was Mara Ellison, 41 years old, raised on a cattle farm outside Cookeville. With a quiet voice and the unnerving habit of waiting 3 full seconds before answering a question, she listened while I explained the hearing, the unanswered certified letter, and the engineering report, then spread the county maps across her desk and said, "We could ask a judge to stop them now, but their lawyers would argue the damage is hypothetical." "It is not hypothetical if I can see the ditch from my kitchen." "You can see a ditch," she said. "What we need is proof of what the ditch does." That was hard advice to accept. My father had taught me that when you see a gate hanging loose, you fix it before the cattle find it. Yet Mara was telling me to stand still while somebody built a disaster and trust the weather to finish the argument. So I documented everything. I photographed the excavator from the road, measured the channel after the crew left, marked the corners on a satellite map, and recorded the diesel smell hanging over the fence line. Jesse's men worked 4 days, carving a clean, shallow trench from Briarstone's overflow pipe to the mouth of my natural swale. On the last afternoon, Vivian arrived in her white SUV wearing sunglasses large enough to qualify as safety equipment. She stood beside the new channel with her hands on her hips, admiring it like a woman inspecting a new swimming pool. "I'm glad we finally found a practical solution," she called across the fence. "You found a cheap solution," I said. She smiled. "Sometimes those are the same thing. Not when the bill belongs to someone else." Her smile tightened. "But only for a second. The county approved it, Mr. Mercer? I suggest you respect the process." Then she got back into her Lexus and drove away, leaving me with the strange feeling that she believed a stamp permit could repeal gravity. Mara hired a hydrologist named Owen Shaw, a semi-retired former state water resources engineer who wore faded suspenders and carried a notebook held together with duct tape. Owen spent an entire afternoon walking my lower field, pushing soil probes into the ground, measuring the slope, and muttering numbers under his breath. At one point, he crouched beside the new trench and stared toward Briarstone for so long I thought he had forgotten I was there. "They modeled this using the wrong baseline," he finally said. Their report assumed Briarstone's retention basin was functioning at full design capacity, but Owen doubted it was. He also found that a 30-foot section of the new ditch crossed almost 18 inches inside my surveyed property line, outside the corridor authorized by the variance. "That part is yours," he said, tapping the soil with his boot. "They dug on your land." Mara's response was simple. "Good." Photograph the measuring tape. July faded into August without much rain, and I started wondering whether Vivian had somehow gotten lucky. The ditch carried a thin stream after afternoon showers, but the lower field stayed usable. I cut hay, repaired a gate, and tried not to stare south every time clouds gathered. Then Vivian sent me another letter, warmer than the first, saying she hoped we could move beyond our earlier disagreement and inviting me to Briarstone's fall barbecue as her personal guest. I read it twice and laughed, not because it was funny, but because the woman had redirected a subdivision's runoff toward my farm and now apparently believed potato salad could heal the relationship. Mara told me not to answer. "She's creating a record of goodwill," she said. "Do not help her." While we waited, we built our own record. I pulled Briarstone's original site plan from the county archives and found a condition buried in the stormwater section requiring all subdivision runoff to remain within the development's engineered system. with no discharge onto adjoining agricultural parcels. Owen reviewed the documents and discovered something worse. The retention basin approved in 2018 was designed for a 25-year storm event, but the basin visible on the final construction plans was nearly a third smaller. Somewhere during development, a revised drawing had been approved without anyone comparing it to the original conditions. Briarstone had inherited a drainage system that had never met its permit, and Vivian's solution was not to fix it but to export the failure downhill. Mara leaned back in her chair when she saw the discrepancy. "Do not mention this to Vivian," she said. "Let her keep believing her report protects her." The rain arrived in September, the remains of a tropical storm that stalled over Middle Tennessee and poured for 3 days. I was visiting my sister in Knoxville when the first bands moved through, and by the time I headed home, the interstate was a gray tunnel of spray. The radio warned about flooded creeks and washed-out county roads. I turned onto my gravel lane after dark, came over the rise near the barn, and saw headlights reflected where no water should have been. My south field had become a lake. Fence posts disappeared halfway into brown water. Loose hay floated against the wire, and the new ditch roared from Briarstone like a man-made creek. My baler sat tilted near the fence, one wheel buried, its lower housing submerged. I stood in the rain with my phone raised and took 52 photographs, then recorded 8 minutes of video while water rushed through the channel Vivian had called practical. I called Mara from the cab of my truck. "How bad?" she asked. "My field is gone. Equipment, baler is half underwater." She paused, and her voice became very calm. "Do not move anything until the dealer documents it. We file Monday." By morning, the rain had stopped, but the water remained, thick and copper-colored, carrying the sour smell of drowned grass and clay. My neighbor Hank Porter walked the fence with me, hands shoved into his jacket pockets. He had known my family since before I was born and was not a man who wasted words. After 10 minutes, he shook his head and said, "She did exactly what you told them she would." The equipment dealer estimated nearly $11,000 in damage. Owen took soil samples and found oxygen-starved conditions across just over 2 acres, with compaction and crop loss likely to continue for multiple seasons. Mara filed suit against Briarstone Reserve HOA and Vivian Cross personally for altered drainage, nuisance, trespass, property damage, in violation of the original subdivision conditions. Their insurance attorney called within 4 days and offered $15,000 to make the case disappear. Mara countered at $158,000, itemized down to the dollar, including equipment repair, lost hay, soil rehabilitation, professional fees, and projected productivity loss. The attorney said the number was unreasonable. Mara said, "So was flooding a farm to protect a decorative clubhouse pond. That should have been the moment Vivian became careful." But Vivian did not become careful when threatened. She became mean. She mailed letters to 6 surrounding landowners calling me hostile, dishonest, and responsible for a pre-existing drainage problem. She used HOA letterhead, signed her title, and asked my neighbors not to support what she called an opportunistic lawsuit. Hank brought me his copy and laid it on my kitchen table. "She thinks nobody around here knows you," he said. She was wrong about that too. Within a week, 3 other families contacted me with their own stories about Vivian blocking farm permits, filing noise complaints, and using county contacts to pressure anyone who challenged Briarstone. What she thought would isolate me did the opposite. She had spent years creating enemies one letter at a time, and now they were all sitting around my kitchen table with folders in their hands. Then Owen called late one Thursday evening, his voice unusually tight. His groundwater model was complete, and the result went beyond my field. By pushing stormwater into my swale, Briarstone had altered the subsurface flow beneath the clay ridge, separating my farm from the subdivision's lowest street. The next major rainfall would not stop at my property line. Water would move laterally beneath the ground and build pressure against the basements of 9 homes on Laurel Bend, and according to Owen, the first 3 were already close to failure. "How long?" I asked. "One more serious storm," he said. "Maybe 2. Mara sent Briarstone's attorney a formal warning the next morning. They acknowledged receiving it, held a private emergency meeting that weekend, and chose not to remove the ditch. Vivian hired another engineering firm to dispute Owen's report, then told homeowners everything was under control. That was when I understood the fight had changed. It was no longer just about my field, my baler, or the land my grandfather left me. Vivian had been warned in writing that her decision could flood her own neighbors, and rather than admit she had been wrong, she placed another report on top of the truth and waited for the sky to prove which one was heavier. I spent the next 3 weeks turning my barn into a quiet little weather station. Owen helped me install 6 wireless soil moisture sensors across the lower field, each one buried at a different depth and connected to a data logger mounted beside the electrical panel. It was not dramatic, no flashing lights, no courtroom music, just numbers arriving every 15 minutes, but those numbers were harder to intimidate than people. I also hired a licensed surveyor to reset the boundary pins and record the section where Briarstone's ditch crossed onto my property. Then I filed a formal civil notice of trespass with the county clerk. After that, Hank introduced me to Denise Warren, a vegetable grower north of my place who had kept every complaint Vivian had filed against her roadside produce stand. Another neighbor, retired Army mechanic Leon Brooks, had letters from the HOA accusing his tractor of creating an unacceptable visual disturbance. By October, my kitchen table looked like a small evidence warehouse. Stacks of permits, certified mail receipts, photographs, engineering plans, and handwritten notes from people Vivian had spent years treating like background scenery. Then the county supervisor for our district, Samuel Price, agreed to meet with us. Leon knew him from a veterans group, and we did not ask Samuel to take sides. We simply showed him the original site plan, the undersized retention basin, and the revised permit that had somehow ignored the original stormwater condition. Samuel read the pages twice, looked up, and said, "Has anyone in planning compared these documents?" Mara answered, "Apparently not." He requested an internal compliance review the following morning. Vivian must have heard about it because 2 days later Martin Hale appeared at my door carrying another notice. This one accusing me of operating an unpermitted commercial agricultural business. I stared at him, then at the hayfield behind him, and said, "My family has been farming this land since Eisenhower was president." Martin sighed. "I know." Tennessee's right to farm protections made the complaint almost laughable, and Mara had it dismissed in less than 2 weeks. But Vivian was no longer trying to win cleanly. She was trying to make resistance expensive. November brought 4 inches of rain in 2 days. My sensors showed the lower field reaching 93% saturation and remaining there nearly 3 times longer than it had before the ditch was built. Mara sent the data to the HOA's insurance attorney. It did not respond. Then, on the first weekend of December, the sky opened for 4 straight days. My field flooded again, but this time I barely looked at it because Owen called before dawn on Monday. 3 homes on Laurel Bend had water in their basements. By Tuesday, 5 families were filing claims. One homeowner named Daniel Reed came to my house after the HOA told residents the storm had been unusually severe and unrelated to the drainage modification. I invited him inside, poured coffee, and showed him Mara's warning letter, the delivery confirmation, and Owen's report predicting exactly what had happened. Daniel read in silence, his jaw tightening with every page. "They knew?" he finally asked. "They were warned, and they told us nothing." He left with copies and hired his own attorney before the end of the week. The pressure multiplied fast. Laurel Bend residents formed a group. Other homeowners began questioning why their reserve fund was being used for legal defense, and Vivian called an emergency HOA meeting where she proposed spending $75,000 on a Nashville litigation firm. According to the minutes, she described us as coordinated outside agitators. I had lived there 43 years. But apparently I was now an outsider invading the subdivision from the farm it had been built beside. Her last major mistake came when she called Owen directly. She told him his report was reckless, threatened to report him to the state licensing board, and suggested he should reconsider being involved before his reputation suffered. Owen recorded the call legally and sent it to Mara. When Vivian's insurance attorney heard it, the tone of negotiations changed overnight. The first serious offer was $94,000. Removal of the ditch, and a written apology. I turned it down. Mara reminded me that trials carried risk. "I know," I said, "but that settlement fixes my field and leaves the system that caused all of this in place." The county compliance review was presented at the January board meeting. The room was packed, farmers along one wall, Briarstone homeowners along the other. Vivian in the third row wearing pearl earrings and the expression of someone expecting procedure to protect her. Samuel Price read the findings slowly. Briarstone's retention basin had been built at approximately 72% of its approved capacity. The variance allowing drainage onto my farm had relied on incorrect assumptions about a system already out of compliance. The variance was rescinded immediately, and the HOA was ordered to rebuild the basin within 180 days at an estimated cost between $150,000 and $250,000. Then Daniel stood and asked why residents had never been told about the written warning before their basements flooded. The room went still. Vivian rose and tried to call the question inappropriate because of pending litigation. The board chair, Eleanor Knox, looked over her glasses and asked, "Ms. Cross, as a member of the County Planning Advisory Committee, did you have access to Briarstone's original approval documents?" Vivian's face changed. "Only slightly, but enough. I do not believe that is relevant." Eleanor wrote something down. "The county attorney will decide that." 11 days later, Vivian resigned from the planning committee. A month after that, she resigned as HOA president, citing personal reasons. The case is settled soon afterward. I received $218,000, full soil restoration, replacement of the damaged equipment, 36 months of agricultural productivity compensation, removal of the ditch, and written retraction sent to every neighbor Vivian had contacted. The Worrellben families reached separate settlements. Briarstone rebuilt the retention basin for $168,000. Funded partly by insurance and partly by a special assessment Vivian had promised residents they would never need. By spring, crews had regraded my field, aerated the compacted clay, and worked 15 tons of compost into the damaged soil. The first hay crop came in thin, the second came in better, and by the following summer the field looked like itself again. I kept the sensors running. Maybe that sounds paranoid, but there is comfort in a record that cannot be rewritten by somebody with a title and expensive stationery. I still think about Vivian sometimes. And here is the part people argue about. Some say I should have accepted the early settlement, protected my own land, and walked away before the entire neighborhood got hit with assessments and higher insurance premiums. Maybe they are right. Most of those homeowners did not dig the ditch. They elected the wrong person, trusted the wrong board, and paid for it. But when leadership hides warnings, spends community money to protect itself, and treats someone else's property like a free solution, who should carry the cost? The person who was harmed, or the community that allowed that power to grow unchecked? Tell me what you think in the comments. Was I right to keep pushing until everything came into the open? Or should I have taken the money and left Briarstone to deal with Vivian on its own? Share this with someone fighting an HOA, a county office, or anybody who thinks a stamp permit makes them untouchable. And subscribe, because the next story begins with a fence, an unrecorded easement, and a neighbor who discovered too late that property lines do not move just because you want them to.